Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Rauschenbusch, and I am the Senior Advisor for Public Affairs and Innovation at Interfaith Youth Corps. And I am thrilled about this conversation. And so thank you for joining us. I am honored to be with this group of interfaith pioneers. I've been working in this field for a long time. I view these four panelists as pioneers in interfaith work. They've made space in the workplace for people to come as they are in the fullness of themselves, as religious people, as spiritual people, no matter what the worldview, and they add to the richness of the grand mix of what makes a company or an organization an excellent place to work and a good place to spend a lot of our time, which is what we do at work. We spend a lot of our lives there. So these people have helped make individuals feel less alone, and they've helped communities enjoy the diversity, the richness that exists within that space. So over the next hour, we're going to talk about interfaith ERGs, which is employee resource groups or business resource groups, as our Twitter friend will explain to us. And then also we will have a chance to hear from your questions. We want to know what goes into these things. We want to know, like, what are some of the needs that they have met, and what's the future of this kind of work in organizations, in corporations. So this is a discussion between all of us, and we hope we will all go away enriched and excited about the possibility of interfaith groups and interfaith cooperation located in companies. So I want to start by extending my deep thanks to Farah Siddiqui, who is at Salesforce, who founded Faithforce at Salesforce, and who really helped to organize this panel. She has this network, this wonderful network. So again, thank you very much, Farah. I'm going to do very brief introductions of each of our panelists because what you don't want to hear is me droning on about it. But we're gonna put their longer bios in the chat, and I urge you to look at each of their bios and find these people because they're doing incredible work. So starting with Farah Siddiqui, who's the manager of Trailhead Programs and Processes at Salesforce and the co-founder and global president of Faithforce, Salesforce Interfaith Employee Resource Group. Dan Eckstein is a director within Accenture's media and technology practice, and he is the leader of Accenture's Jewish employee resource globally, as well as the lead of Interfaith Employee Resource Group in the Northeast. Mike Close is the co-founder and co-chair of Twitter's newest BRG, Business Resource Group at Twitter Faith, where he gets to champion faith inclusion at Twitter for his fellow tweeps, which is a new term for me. We'll be hearing a little bit about that around the globe. And I encourage you to follow Mike on Twitter, of course. Becky Pomerleau serves as the Director of Finance Risk Management at PayPal, where she also co-leads PayPal's Interfaith Diversity and Inclusion community. So again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists. And I'm going to start with you, Farah, and ask you to talk about the genesis of Faithforce and a little bit about what were the needs that were unmet and how did you manage to start this interfaith ERG at Salesforce?
Thanks, Paul, for a great intro. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about our story at Salesforce and how we've brought faith inclusion with Faithforce. But before I go into that, I just want to give a little bit of insight into who I am, which will kind of feed into why Faithforce came about. So I'm a Muslim, born and raised in Miami, Florida. So I grew up with this identity, right? It's been part of me my whole life. I would say that my interfaith journey has been lifelong because in grade school, right, I was an only. In middle school, I was an only. In, the mall, I would be the only one looking like myself. And in all of these spaces, you want to find ways to fit in and ways to belong. And, I think I did that. And I did that through an amazing community that I was supported by with just the Muslim community, the Pakistani community I was part of, but also through friendships that I've made in school of people who are different. My best friend in elementary school was a Jehovah's Witness. My best friend in high school was a Seventh-day Adventist. And through these relationships, right, it wasn't like I was the only odd one out, they were too. And we could do it together, and we could be different together and respect each other. And it was just a beautiful kind of upbringing. And so being different, it was just normal to me. But at the same time, I don't think anybody likes it, to be the odd one out, having to put on, tights underneath my shorts in gym and everybody looking at me weird, like, why is she doing that? Or not eating the hot dogs during the lunch day everyone is excited about because I couldn't, they weren't halal, they weren't kosher. So all of those things kind of just weigh on you, always being a little bit left out and feeling that lack of belonging that you see everybody else around you experiencing. So, move on to college. And finally, and a lot of the attendees here might be in college right now or in that university setting. I was actually the president of the Muslim Student Association at my university. And, why did I find that community? Because you wanted to find like-minded people when you're surrounded by people who aren't like you. And to have that community, to have that support, just builds your confidence in your identity. So it was such a valuable time for me to find that space of belonging in the college setting. But this was all pre-9/11, right? Then 9/11 happens. And just for my community, right, it was just a very difficult, just for the world, it was a difficult time. But for the Muslim community in America, to be viewed with suspicion and just all the stuff the baggage that went around with that. There was such a need to go beyond yourself, to show people that what you're seeing on the news, what you're seeing in the movies, that's not my community. There's so much more to Muslims, and my experience is not any of that. So how do I go across my identity and talk to people and help them see the beauty of my tradition? So that just kind of led me to constantly talking and learning and joining, events and listening to stories that help me connect with people who are different. And I found so much value in learning about different identities, like the Black experience, the LGBTQ experience, and seeing my struggle in that story. Like, I relate, whatever you went through. It's a very different lens of what I went through, but at the heart, those feelings were so similar, right? And so I heard all of these other stories and I was like, where's my story? Where is that faith experience? And it just wasn't as loud, and just wanted to know if there could be a space for it. So then come into work, right? I've been in the corporate America for around 12 years, and throughout my entire career, I've been the only one who looked like me and believed like me in the spaces that I was in, right? An office of 30 people, an office of 200 people. I was the only hijabi woman. So again, everyone's nice, everyone's caring, but do I really belong, right? There's walls that I'm creating. There's walls that exist because of perceptions I know people have about my faith, and they just don't know how to talk to me about it. So can we talk about it? Can we just break down those walls? So at Salesforce, there was already a culture of belonging, of allyship, but there just wasn't that faith narrative. And so just reached out to the Office of Equality and asked a question to the program owner there, saying, can we add an element of faith inclusion? Can we try an interfaith group? And he was down for it. And he said, let's do some research and see what we can come up with. So we talked to a few different companies to see how they were set up and how they approached it. And we didn't really see an interfaith model. We saw a lot of faith-based models. And I just knew I didn't want to go that route. I wanted to find, I wanted to find a space for myself to be able to be supported in who I am, but I wanted to go beyond myself too, because there's so much value in going outside of yourself and learning about the other. So how can we combine that, be your authentic self, confidence in who you are, but also build those relationships across, divides, and in my case, religious divides, but everything else too. So Faithforce came about. We put a charter together, pitched it to our executives, and they said, let's do it. No pushback. A little bit, make sure, how are we gonna address if this happens or that happens? There's always concerns when you talk about religion at work. But our charter was very clear in how we were gonna address it. We have an HR structure at a company just like any others, right? So any issues we can just direct in the right channels. But when it comes to inclusion and belonging, recognizing that faith is just a part of our identity. And when we say bring your full self to work, that part is included. You couldn't really argue against it. So we got set up, we launched in around 5 cities initially. And since then, we have grown to over 17 cities across 5 continents, 3,000 plus members of all different faith backgrounds. And it's been an amazing journey. And we got 50,000 employees at Salesforce, and I need to reach them all. So the work's not done, but just really excited to be able to make a difference in my own little way.
Thank you so much, Farah. That was inspiring. Mike, can you tell us about your experience at Twitter?
Yeah, for sure. So first off, for anybody that missed the intro, my name is Mike. I'm one of the co-founders and co-chairs of Twitter Faith, our multi-faith BRG. I use he, him pronouns. Twitter is also hiring for anybody looking for a job. But thank you so much for having me here today. I really, really appreciate this conversation and just hearing Farah speak and share a bit of her story. I don't know how I could follow that. Yeah, when it comes to Twitter Faith, I think I would be remiss not to give credit to a handful of other Twitter employees who, before I ever got involved, they raised their voice to our leadership to say, faith is missing from our inclusion and diversity work, very similar to what Farah identified. And our Twitter employees, which I'll probably end up referring to as tweeps just by habit, they indicated to our leadership that we need to get better at this. And to be honest, I didn't know, like I work in an office that's about 40 people. I'm probably 1 or 2 of those 40 people that identify with the faith. And it's not something I really talk about or not used to. So I didn't really know it was possible to even just raise my voice to our leadership and indicate this. Yeah, I'm grateful for other tweeps who did, and we already have some amazing work being done with existing BRGs in our company. But if our goal is to truly make Twitter the most inclusive and diverse tech company in the world, then faith absolutely needs to be represented, as it's core to the identity of billions of people around the world. So fortunately, we have such a supportive inclusion and diversity team. So making the case for Twitter Faith, I don't think was a huge challenge. And getting it off the ground has been a very interesting experience, to say the least. We launched back in January, right heading into a global lockdown. As Paul mentioned, we do call our a group a BRG, so a business resource group. The difference there between an ERG and BRG, or the way I see it, is that our BRGs are uniquely positioned to not only impact the employee experience, but also have a voice in the policies, the products and services that our company creates and puts out there in the world. So for example, something that's a work in progress for us right now is how do we tackle the anti-Semitism that's happening admittedly on our platform, and how do we get better at getting it off our platform? And that's up to us as a BRG. We're able to make those recommendations and have a seat at the table in those conversations. So yeah, when it comes to the goal and mission of our BRG, we're multi-faith, and we were established in order to acknowledge, celebrate, and foster understanding of global faith, belief diversity, both within our company and on our service. And that, again, that all ladders up to this idea of bringing your whole authentic self to work, not feeling like you need to check your faith at the door when you come in, not feeling like you need to head to the parking lot to pray, not shying away from talking about your beliefs or telling people that you went to church on the weekend or that you prayed about this idea that you had at work. So we really want to provide cover for our tweeps and give tweeps permission to practice their faith both at work and also through their work. So yeah, I just say, like, the biggest learning that we've had in the past 8 or so months in starting this BRG, if I can share for anyone who's looking to start one at their company or organization, we spent the bulk of the first bit just really brainstorming ideas, trying to crystallize our principles on what the BRG actually stands for. And shout out to Farah, we might have taken a peek at your charter to get some ideas as well. And that was super helpful in helping us clarify what do we stand for. Yeah, a lot of trial and error. And my biggest learning, if you take anything away from what I'm saying, is to form a team around you. I'm nothing without my fellow chairs, without my fellow office ambassadors. We also have a committee internally within Twitter Faith, knowing that I'm definitely not a subject matter expert in every single faith or belief out there. We have a committee of probably about 10 right now, tweeps that cover a whole bunch of different faiths that will consult us and answer questions that we have about different observances or holidays or just things about different faiths that I myself wouldn't know about. And that has been invaluable to getting things off the ground and establishing processes and really advocating for all of our tweeps around the world. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to take up all the time. I want to hear from the other folks as well.
I think it might be helpful actually if you all can find your mission statements or like your principles of operation, and it would be great to, and we could supply those to the folks listening so that they can walk away with those resources, and we can send that in the email tomorrow. Becky, you want to go next?
Absolutely, and you know, really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to be sharing, because a part of our mission for our interfaith group, which we call Believe, is to not just impact within the four walls of PayPal, but also to impact the communities where we do business and beyond. So again, really appreciate this opportunity, and you know, pick up on a couple of things that Mike and Farah have shared so far. I would also say that for those who are interested in starting or just in the process of getting started, that benchmarking is so important because it really helps break down some of the concerns that you know, folks may be having, right? Because you can say, well, but you know, you may have this concern, but look, you know, Salesforce is already doing this, or Twitter is already doing this, or, you know, et cetera, right? And so we, being a tech company in Silicon Valley, had specifically benchmarked with Salesforce, Google, Apple, Facebook, you know, companies that like we couldn't then have people within PayPal saying, oh, but well, yeah, maybe an airline is able to do that, but that's a totally different company culture, right? We really wanted to benchmark with people who were in similar industries as us. So again, that it was a appropriate benchmarking, and likewise we had looked at Farah's charter and kind of the slide that has the here's what we'll do, here's what we'll not do, and we have something similar that's been a very effective communication tool, because you can put a mission statement out there, but then people always, the very next question is, okay, but what does that really mean in practice? Right, and so we likewise have a slide that we always share accompanying our mission statement that says, you know, here's what we are about and here's what we're not about. Like, we're not about promoting a political agenda. We're not about promoting one faith over another. We're also not about trying to say, well, all faiths are basically the same, right? So those are some things that, as we also took around a year to get to the point of launching, have been really key in our journey. So I'll take a step back and go back to some of my personal reasons as well for helping to co-found Believe at PayPal. So 6 years ago, I suffered a series of heart attacks, which I was someone who had always been an athlete my entire life, had no pre-existing conditions, no family history of heart disease. And so it came as a complete shock. And in fact, the damage from the heart attacks were so severe that within a day of experiencing my second heart attack, I was in need of a heart transplant, which I was blessed to receive just 2 weeks later, which is a pretty quick turnaround by most standards. Sometimes folks are on the waiting list for months. or even sometimes, depending on the severity of their condition, years. So on a side note, if you're not signed up to be an organ donor, please do. But you know, what really helped me through that life-altering, painful experience of like waking up in a different hospital like 5 days later, from like skiing inactive one day to waking up in another hospital learning I needed a heart transplant, my hope and my stability during that time were really my faith. And when I was able 7 months later to come back to work, I was, thinking, that sense of, that source of hope, that source of resiliency, that's something that I want to be able to bring more fully into my everyday life and into my work. And so I was very fortunate to have some connections with people in leadership positions at PayPal who had come from other companies that, like Amex, who did have faith-based employee resource groups and had had them for like 20 plus years. So our senior vice president, general counsel at the time, former, but at the time, Wanji Walcott was the one who really helped from an executive level champion this. So you can imagine when you have like your head of legal saying we should do this, that breaks down a lot of potential barriers that I've heard folks that have run up against in other companies. And so for me, it was really about truly, I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but being able to bring that full, your whole self to work. And as we were trying to kind of convince our HR folks and our diversity and inclusion programs that there was momentum around this, what really kind of tipped the scales for us is we had a conscious inclusion training that everyone at PayPal was going through. And one of the things they did in that training was ask people to just throw out some phrases that describe their core identity. And they were finding that a lot of people actually were saying phrases or words that made reference to their faith background. And so it wasn't necessarily so much about something that you could visually observe about them, which was where our existing, what at the time we called diversity and inclusion communities, but it was something much deeper than that. Their core identities were much deeper than that. And so our next decision point also was around, well, should we have an interfaith employee resource group, or should we have the separate ERGs by faith background? And it was really important to our D&I team to make sure that we were being inclusive. In addition to that, as we were benchmarking with some of the other tech companies that I mentioned, who do have a variety of models, we really looked at what Salesforce was doing and said, gosh, that seems like when we think about making sure we're being inclusive and that we're actually, when we set out our mission statement to say that we wanted to increase understanding and awareness, we're not going to achieve that mission if we're still in our separate groups, right? We really want to be functioning together as an interfaith group. And so that's why we chose to go interfaith. We launched in December of last year. It was kind of a soft launch at our corporate headquarters. And then we did our formal global launch in June of this year, also, in a virtual world, which has had its pros and cons. Certainly our programming, because it's all gone virtual, is now available to folks around the world. On the other hand, you do lose a little bit of some of that in-person connectivity and local office connectivity, but definitely am very grateful that have had this opportunity to start our interfaith group and get it off the ground. We are at a point now where we've been able to get programming in place to have folks, and which we'll talk more about in a little bit, but things for folks to start engaging in. Our next step and our next kind of challenge is really how do we, now that we're increasing our membership, how do we make sure that we're putting in place the right leadership positions? Because we have representation from all of the major world religions. We also want to make sure we're bringing in representation from humanists, spiritualists that maybe don't fall into that. And then also just the run the business type of stuff of having a communications chair, a growth chair, those types of things, right? That's kind of where we're at now, is making sure we get people in those roles so that we can really grow this thing to the vision that we have.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Dan, let us know what Accenture is doing, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Sure, and thank you again for having me, and it's an honor to be with some of my peers here who are all along the journey of helping our employees at every company bring their whole selves to work as it relates to faith. And to me, my background is similar in some respects to what Farah was saying, but at the same regard, very different. And for me, as an Orthodox Jewish person, I grew up in more of a world where my peers and friends, going to private school, Jewish private school, my world was really the Jewish world. And it was really only until I came into the workplace where I had that exposure to people that weren't like me. So, the questions about, do I wear a kippah or, do I not wear a kippah? And these are questions of how do you deal with the food situation when I'm going out for dinners? Do you order X, Y, Z or something else? So how open do I share with people about what is important to me related to my faith? So those were like deep questions that I had to ask myself as I was going into this into the workplace. And I've had a couple of jobs and really was solidified in terms of where I was sitting, but it was really only when I came to Accenture. I remember it was probably like a year or so into it, my time here, and I heard about our local office was had some money at the end of the fiscal year, and they had $1,000, and they heard that I was Jewish. And they're like, oh, we had a Jewish group, but they never really did anything. Do you want the money? And I said, great, let's take it. Let's figure out how we're going to be able to spend this to be able to engage our employees. And we took our Jewish group, which then was just like maybe 15, 20 people in the New York office, and we went to Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway, which was right around our office in New York. And it was our first event where we were bringing people together, and people were saying, wow, this is amazing that we're able to have this happen in the workplace. And then, after that, I heard about this bigger interfaith group, which wasn't necessarily doing a ton, but it was around. And at Accenture, it's really been a journey for us on the interfaith, spectrum. So for us, it really started probably around even 10 years ago as an affinity circle, which was mostly from some Christian employees who were gathered around the room to learn and pray together. And that's sort of how it started as a grassroots movement. And it was more of an opportunity to really, get people of similar like-minded interests together to be able to figure out how do they come together in the work environments. And over the years, our faith groups have really started to spring up into different areas. And then, that has transitioned into a more formalized structure where we have both the faith groups and we have interfaith. So interfaith is the overall umbrella. And then you have different faith groups: Muslim, Buddhist, Baha'i, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, atheists, and non-believers, and Sikh. And we're now having stronger alignment at the interfaith level with I&D, inclusion diversity leads, in order to have that tighter integration, both with the company, but also between faith and interfaith. So that's sort of been our structure. And for us, one of the things that stands out for me is one of our Building Bridges workshops. And what we did was that there's after the series of racial events that happened a couple of years ago, and unfortunately still to this day, is building these connected workshops to bring our employees together to talk about these topics. And we ended up doing one specifically around faith. And it was just an empowering event where we brought different clergy from all the different faith groups to come in and talk. We ended off the day with a Friday night Sabbath dinner at a restaurant on the Upper West Side, where we had an interfaith audience being able to understand from a Jewish faith, what do the Jewish people do on a Friday night? What are the songs that they're singing? And to be able to experience that both from the Jewish perspective and from others who are non-Jewish, to be able to share those types of experiences was really totally different in the workplace. So to me, a lot of our time now is now focused on how do we make sure we have those policies and procedures. So a lot around, we're building a new office in 1 Manhattan West, and making sure that we have a prayer space and being able to figure out what are the things that help our employees be able to do that. From the perspective of like, what are the policies that, someone who wants to, let's say, come out of the closet, and that could be in an LGBT perspective, it could be on a faith perspective, or a disability perspective. It doesn't make a difference. How do we make those, make sure that employees are empowered to have those types of conversations is so important, because if the policies aren't there to support the employees, then the employees aren't necessarily going to be able to have the strength to be able to share what is important to them. So making sure we have the policies, then we empower people. And then it's really training all of our employees across all levels around these faith accommodations. So being able to train our recruiting teams, our business teams, and find those opportunities like Mike was talking about, of how do we figure out that connection to the business. So is there a way for us to be able to think through a financial services company that wants to think about how do they bring faith into an investment strategy, and how can we as consultants help them through that journey? And I think what is important, especially now, is this whole idea of intersectionality, of being able to look at things not just with our own groups, but also our neighboring groups. And that could be both from an LGBT, a racial perspective, and trying to see what are the things that bring us together. Because I think that often is the thing that will really solidify our relationships, is seeing the commonalities that we have and realizing that we are so similar together. So that's a little bit about our journey, and we are now on that growth and expansion phase, moving to different locations, expanding our training, and being able to really be pulled in by the company for these important initiatives versus the opposite.
I love that. I think I heard that there was actually like that a new corporate office was going to incorporate a prayer space, which to me is quite revolutionary. And so if these groups can help influence the architecture of corporate America, that is really something. That's a good example. You gave a couple good examples of how to concretize the work that you're doing and what it really means to the employees who are in your companies. And so what I would love for you each to offer a brief anecdote of a time which really comes to your mind of why the work you're doing matters to people in their lives. And so if you can each offer just a brief anecdote of a time over the last year or two when you felt like the work of your interfaith ERG or BRG was really making a solid difference in the life of someone who showed up to work on a certain day. Farah, why don't you kick us off and we'll go around.
Sure. So I have a couple examples. You want me to keep it brief? I'll try to find the best one. One thing, as a person from a minority group or minority tradition, right? Seeing that support is huge, right? So we see that right now with our Black employees, feeling supported, feeling like your voice is heard, your community's pain is felt, and work is done to address it, right? I think that matters so much to our employees. So as a Muslim, and you can use this example for a Jewish employee, Christian employee. There's so many ways to look at it. But as a Muslim, coming into work when I know there's some crazy stuff happening in the world related to my community, it brings you down. It hurts. You want to go into a room and cry, and then you got to get out and just do your work and act like nothing's wrong, and that's hard. So to come into work and actually, people hear about the Christchurch shooting, and your manager texts you in the morning saying, "Are you okay? Or everything all right? If you need to take a break, go ahead," right? And the fact that they feel comfortable enough to reach out and say that to me now, past 10 years, no one ever said anything about anything, right? It is just such a testament to the value of just creating that group, that space, that this is okay to talk about, guys. Your Jewish employees hurting right now. It's okay to ask them if they're okay and give them the day off if they need it, just like we're doing for our Black employees who need to know that we understand and we care and we're here to support you. So at Salesforce, after Tree of Life, after Christchurch, after the Sri Lanka shootings, after each of these events that impacted our faith communities, where we knew they were hurting, we rallied together as a company and we held these healing circles. We brought in speakers from different faith traditions. For the Tree of Life example, we brought in a rabbi to share some beauty around the Jewish traditions on just explaining about grief and mourning and support and community. And it was just a beautiful time to sit with our Jewish employees and listen to them and say that we're here if you need us. And as a company, we support you and just donating where we can donate to help support, right? And did the same thing for Christchurch and the Muslim communities, being shown love and support, and seeing the tweets from your CEO. Just never expected something like that at work. And to see that Faithforce is able to help this come about because of, Mike mentioned, it doesn't take one person, it takes a team. We have an amazing team of global leaders, regional leaders, executives who are just so supportive of this message. So I think just that has been so empowering for employees to see that support, for our sick employees as well, right? It doesn't matter what your identity is, we're here to support you. And that's known now at the company. So I think that's pretty huge.
Thank you. Becky, you want to go next?
And at PayPal, we have other companies as well. I think you've used the word allyship, right? And so we have an acronym for allyship. The A stands for ACT, listen, learn, and yield your privilege in terms of ally, right? And that's how we kind of help teach people how to be an ally, not necessarily in that order, because you should probably listen and learn before you act. But a lot of our events in our year one here are focused around the listening and the learning. And a shout out to Farah. She was a guest speaker at an event that we hosted, a learning event that we hosted around Ramadan, and really describing for attendees not only what is Ramadan and how is it celebrated, but specifically based on how it is celebrated, how can you support your Muslim colleagues in the workplace? For example, please do not schedule meetings at the time that they're breaking their fast because they have not eaten all day and like this is their chance to actually get to eat. Or during Ramadan, please don't, while people are fasting during the day, let's not schedule a big smorgasbord type of event for everyone, except your Muslim colleague feels left out because they cannot partake in that event, right? So coming out of that event, what was really, I think, a key win for us is that our Muslim colleagues were saying how just, and Farah's talked about this already, right? How it made them feel so included when there were all these people not of the Muslim faith attending the event and actively wanting to, having that natural curiosity, right? Actively wanting to learn about it, because when we have Muslim events, it's not, okay, so all the Muslim people show up, right? We have Muslim events and the Christians and the Jewish and the atheists and everyone else show up in addition to the Muslims, right? But to really learn about it and to build those bridges even within our faith communities so that we can support each other in the workplace.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, so when I think about impact of Twitter Faith so far, I think that one thing we discovered pretty quickly was that a really easy entry point for people into the conversation around faith is food. And normally in non-COVID times, we would be gathering around a table with our friends and our families and communities and sharing a meal and having conversation, but obviously that's not possible right now. But even still, food provides a way to break down barriers. And so take that alongside this idea that faith is fun. I think we get so caught up sometimes in being really serious about faith, and there's a time and a place for sure, don't get me wrong. But when I think of my beliefs in the Bible, it says the joy of the Lord is your strength. And at Twitter Faith, we're trying to find ways, how do we make faith fun and accessible and create an easy entry point for people? So over the course of the past 6 months, we put on now 4 different virtual events where for 4 different faith traditions and occasions where Tweeps have done a cooking demonstration for some kind of dish or baked good that relates to the occasion that they're celebrating. So we started with Purim a few months back, where Tweep made these hamantaschen cookies, which were so deliciously looking. I didn't taste it myself, but and then from there we moved on to Orthodox Easter, where another Tweep from Ireland did a baking demo of this cake she was making. And then And then we moved on to Islamic New Year, which is not so much the most celebratory type of occasion, but it does call for a meal with community and family. And it's through that demonstration that we're able to start to explain traditions to people, start to share what it is that we believe, why we believe it, how we celebrate it, and also during this time, what makes it hard to celebrate. I think it's really meaningful for our tweeps to share with their colleagues, like, yeah, Rosh Hashanah really sucked that I couldn't have a meal with my entire family, but I made this challah bread and it looks so wonderful. So we've really been prioritizing things like that, and the impact that we've seen is that this conversation around faith is going outside of the borders of just people of faith, but into the rest of the company as well. So that's what we're looking to do more of in the future.
Yeah, for me, I would, obviously I think what Fire mentioned specifically around the leadership around when those tragedy occur, I think has been super uplifting for me. And I remember after the Pittsburgh shooting, seeing a text message from the head of HR, Ellen Shook at Accenture, when she texted me like, Dan, are you okay? Can you talk? And at that point we just ended the Shabbos and I had no clue what was going on. So I was wondering, am I going to get fired? But but at the end of the day, being able to have that relationship with our leadership and getting on the phone with the CEO that night and her saying, I'm going to personally write a note to the community. I was just shocked and in awe and inspired by that. And it meant a lot. But for me, my story would really be aligned to something that my friend Elon Kogut reminded me of recently. And one of our first events after that Fiddler on the Roof event was something called Dating, Dining, and Devotion. And we had each of our faith leads talk about how their faith group relates to romance, food, dietary laws, prayer, meditation. And it was a great event, packed audience, and it was exciting to have everyone together. A couple of days later, someone came over to me. He was a colleague who was a project manager, and he told me a story about how he was leading this team, and it was a virtual team. And he had one analyst who always went MIA on a Friday afternoon. He had no idea where he was. He would IM him, never got a response. And all of a sudden, from coming to our event, he heard about the Juma prayer, and he heard about that going on Friday, and he had no clue that Muslims prayed then. And he approached this colleague, and he talked about his own faith as an Orthodox Jewish person and observing the Sabbath. And it came out that he was saying that he was also observant Muslim, and he felt uncomfortable talking about his faith in the workplace. And this manager and employee now built this greater bond together where they have this new shared understanding with each other. And they were able to bring that into this new workplace and have this understanding. And this analyst, and now they're able to go and have the strength to say, hey, I could talk about this. Like, it's not something that I need to keep to myself and just go MIA because you're scared about who you are. And I think that to me is one of the most important examples to be talking about, is because throughout everything, if we don't empower each of you who are listening to talk about these topics, then we're not going to be able to have that kind of inclusive environment. People want to see people that look like them, that sound like them, that have similar interactions with like them. And whether you're the same faith belief or not from someone else, the ability for you to be able to talk about it, even if you're an atheist, to be able to talk about what you believe in, has been open the eyes of so many different people. So Paul, over to you for the Q&A.
Great. All right. Well, we do have some really great questions, and you can each take one or two of them. So one of the interesting things that's coming up in a few questions is training. Like, how are you trained to be an interfaith leader? Like, some of you may have trained in higher ed to do this. Others of you may not have any training. So I'm curious, because we have someone who's talking about, Matt mentioned on Facebook that he's working with college students to develop a set of skills that would help lead an this kind of interfaith effort. And he's curious, like, if you were looking for an employee who would be able to bring this to the workplace, what would be the skill set that they would need. And were each of you trained in this, or did you learn it on the job? Did you self-teach? Maybe one or two of you can answer this question. Anybody feel inspired to take this?
I'll take a stab at it. I've had zero training, and I don't think training is necessary. I think an open heart is necessary. I think kindness is necessary, right? Like, what skill set would you bring to a leader, or people that I envision taking over, right, when I retire, is just somebody who's empathetic, who's kind, who's caring, who's, when they see difference, they don't just argue with it, they learn to respect it, right? So how do you build that? You build it through religious literacy training. I would just read up on different traditions, get to know people who are different from you, expand your circles, right? That's kind of what I would advise in terms of skill sets. I think build a kind, soft heart, but I'm sure maybe others have had actual training and you can chime in.
It's funny because I feel like, if you look at some of the other employee resource groups, like there's like, oh, if there's a disability group or an LGBT group or an African American group, the question generally isn't like, oh, what training have you had, right? It's a question from a faith perspective of like, oh, faith is so sensitive that we need to make sure that you have training because you can't mess this up. And I think, to your point, Farah, I think one of the things that I always, share with people is you just got to try and do something, right? You sometimes could get so woven into like, I want to make sure every I is dotted, T is crossed, but you just got to do something and figure out, how am I going to engage employees? And you have to figure out for yourself, how am I as an individual? And it's that introspection that each of us need to have, is how are we going to look at ourselves and say, you know what, these are my experiences, and I didn't think of myself as a leader, and I didn't think of myself as an industry expert, but I have my own experiences, and I could bring those to the table. And I think for me, that was sort of the eye-opening piece for me, is not realizing that I was just a Jewish person who's coming to work, but I was a Jewish person who had experiences that I can now bring light to other people as well. And I think that to me was the exciting part.
Becky or Mike, do you feel anything?
I would just add, I likewise have had no formal training in this space, and it's more a learning by doing. Some of the best advice that I was given along the journey of starting are two things that hopefully could be key takeaways for our audience. The first is seek first to understand. So similar to what Farah was mentioning in terms of an open heart, right? As you approach these situations where you may be getting into difficult conversations with people, whether it's about faith or otherwise, right? But that's the type of skill set or characteristic that you would be looking for in an interfaith leader, someone who seeks first to understand and doesn't just come in with like, well, this is my approach or my way. And then the second thing is to be a magnet and not a detractor. So if your intent is to attract people and be a magnet, right, you're going to approach how you run interfaith very differently than maybe, again, someone who is kind of a my way or the highway type of situation. I will say that for myself, I realize I haven't mentioned I'm a Christian. Everyone else has made some reference to that, but I'm also the Christian faith, which is a faith that says that there is one truth and there is one path to heaven. And so I had some initial internal struggle in this, should we do interfaith or separate ERGs, because like, well, am I giving a platform for then other faiths where people could choose to convert to that faith or something, right? And as I really prayed about that internally, the Holy Spirit led me to a verse in the Bible that talks about that God gave us the right to choose him, right? It's the free will concept, right? And so it's not my place. So this is kind of a skill set that I would suggest interfaith leaders have, or if this is something that they kind of struggle with, is, it's not my place in an employee resource group to be saying I'm trying to promote a specific faith. our employee resource groups are exactly about supporting employees in the workplace. And so that is something, whether you're in the context of a collegiate world or a scholarly academic world or otherwise, right? These types of groups are really about supporting people within their context and not about trying to be a church, serve the function of a church or a mosque or a synagogue.
This is going to be the last question. There was a question about the charter and how you rely on it. So I would love for each of you to be able to provide us with your charter so that we could send that out if possible for the group tomorrow. The last question I want to end on is like, in what way does your work intersect with a broader understanding of how religion functions in the workplace and what managers at your company should know in order to provide maximum respect and accommodation for religious people in the workplace? Are you intersecting with managers, or what advice would you, if they were to turn to you, what kind of advice would you suggest for the company as far as a broader sort of approach to supporting religious individuals in the workplace?
I can chime in here really quickly. So one thing Faithforce has done, like we haven't really gone out to create our own faith inclusive training for managers or anything like that, but what we've really done is try to plug in with existing training, existing leadership development things, inclusive events and initiatives that are being developed, making sure there's that element of faith identity that's part of it, right? So if we're doing an inclusive promotion trail or something, learning module, one of the examples, put a woman in a hijab or put a man in a kippah, or so just adding that element so people open their eyes to that type of situation, scenario. As a leader, they'll be put into, as a manager, you have people of different faith identities. How are you going to manage effectively that type of diversity? So there's existing diversity training, there's existing leadership fitting in that narrative is something we really push towards to have that engagement with our leadership.
Who else wants
Can I
to?
add something as well?
Yes, please.
So with Twitter, I feel like there are multiple ways where we tackle this, but something that I have found to be really meaningful with me and my manager is that I've actually made my BRG work and involvement a part of my yearly goals as part of my rating. And it's something that, because of that, comes up in our one-on-ones all the time. And in general, our company does a fantastic job as well of cultivating a culture of allyship. So when you're able to then kind of hold your managers accountable to that and say like, hey, I need you to show up for me. I think that goes a long way. And then once it becomes visible, it becomes contagious. And then other managers will start doing it, and it just will spread through the company and really change things and how you operate as well. So yeah, OKRs, ratings, like included in there if possible.
It's true. Most people don't realize the work that they do sometimes as a passion, right, has so much impact to their daily life. The people that they're managing are people that you could translate into so many different things. And for us, one of the things that we were lucky enough to have was, we got sponsorship to have an Interfaith Summit, and we brought together 150 people for a half-a-day training across all levels, from managing director to the analysts, together to be able to bring our own training. And this is stuff that we really developed on our own. So by empowering our employees at all levels to be able to figure out what is the structure of that day and how are we going to be able to think through that, we were able to build a curriculum ourselves that was able to be shared with employees to managers to managing directors, and now is being taken to each of the different regions as well. So we're trying to bring that same training during some of our Connect days to be able to bring our employees together to talk about these topics and to continue to bring that awareness together.
Well, this has been an extremely inspiring hour that has passed very quickly for me. And so I want to again thank all of our panelists for being so forthcoming and really bringing your whole selves to this conversation, which is actually indicative of the way that this work operates, is like being true, being vulnerable, being authentic to who you are, and letting that be a blessing, each to one of us, each one to the others. And so I feel very blessed by each of you, and for all of you who have been with us today. We will be reaching out soon, and again, thank you again to all of you.